This is Martyn Smith for the bass sessions. I've got the great pleasure of talking to Ian Anderson today about some new material he's releasing and a forthcoming tour, including a date in Birmingham. Ian, thank you very much for talking to us.
Pleasure.
You're out on the road soon, performing material from its very successful album, the Jethro Tull Maple Thick as a Brick, and also new material from Thick as a Brick 2. Can you tell us a little bit about how that's come together and the new material and how that's going to gel with the original material?
Well, 1972 was a long time ago. It was an era when, I suppose, prog rock, I'm not sure that it was called prog rock, just about to be called prog rock. It had been progressive rock, which is a perfectly acceptable way of describing any music that was evolving from perhaps more American rock music. So I never had a problem with being described as a progressive rock musician, which was a term applied, I think, back in 1969 is when I first came across that. That seemed fine. Prog rock started to take on dark undertones of Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Yes and early Genesis and bands that were maybe taking a little too seriously the musicality, the detail, the development of the music in a way that some folk perhaps thought was a little overly intellectual or a little arrogant, a little pompous. And at the time we did Thick as a Brick, it was in full knowledge of the fact that concept albums were likely to get a sideways glance at the very least, or a sound drubbing with every distinct likelihood. So I think what I had in my mind was that I would do this as a bit of a spoof, a bit of a parody of the concept album genre, and it was in the wake of an album called Aqualung, which had done quite well, which was a collection of songs. 2 or 3 of them had some common ground, but it was a collection of songs. However, the music writers at the time had largely decided that this was a concept album in its own right, and I always maintained that it wasn't. Just said, it's just a collection of songs. It's dressed up nicely in an album cover that makes sense, but it's not a concept album. So with Thick as a Brick, it was designed to be the mother of all concept albums, even if it was employing that very peculiarly British kind of surreal humour, the sort of stuff we all loved about the Goons and the Kenneth Horne Show and Monty Python's Flying Circus. So with that in mind, it was an upbeat, warm, slightly humorous moment, maybe a little bit of a dig at the Yeses and the ELPs of this world, but not overtly so. It was just entering into the spirit of prog, but in a humorous way, and we got away with it. We managed to largely escape the criticisms and the concerns, because it did have that humorous element. And in other countries of the world, it did very well. Perhaps because people didn't really understand the humour, they took it quite seriously as a genuine prog rock album. So it sits very uneasily in a way between being aligned with the worst of prog and, in a sense, being the best of British, which is my take on it, because it's very much a British album.
Mm-hmm. And based around the writings of a schoolboy.
Well, if you buy into the improbable, it kind of sets you up to enjoy the fantasy world, and if it wasn't for buying into the improbable in the sense of Sherlock Holmes or Peter Pan or the Rocky Horror Show, or The Walking Dead, the zombie series from America, in which my son-in-law Andrew Lincoln stars. And in fact, he's just on his way flying back from America right at the moment, and I believe the new series of The Walking Dead starts, in fact, tonight. But that won't be tonight by the time you replay this. However, The Walking Dead is the improbable scenario of the Earth having been completely taken over by zombies, and this few band of survivors is struggling to make sense of it all, and we never understand why. What's happened? What caused everybody to become zombies? Why has this happened? And therein lies that kind of setup for the story, and we don't need to know the answer. we accept it. Or those of us who might watch it will accept the fact that it's a done deal. We're all zombies apart from these people that we're now going to explore the intimate working relationship of as the relationships develop and little life's morality tales unfold through the relationship of these people. But I think that's the thing that we're all so good at, and particularly here in Britain, that we can set up these really unlikely scenarios and people go along with it because they want to believe in the musical equivalent of a Santa Claus or fairies. Mm-hmm. And so they kind of go along with it. And I think for a lot of people who listened to Thick as a Brick in 1972 and took it seriously at the time, didn't realise that it was a bit of a joke, a bit of a spoof, I don't think they will feel betrayed by that. I think they probably rather like the fact that they did enter into, even if unwittingly, the improbable suggestion that a precocious 8-year-old schoolboy had written a poem which became the lyrics of the album. Mm-hmm. And I continue with that spoof, but maybe in a slightly darker, more mature way with Thick as a Brick 2, or mm-hmm. Tab 2 as I call it, the 40-year later sequel to the original album.
And that is very much an extension of the original album and takes the schoolboy Gerald Bostock into a new place. Is that how that works?
Well, I actually really tried not to make it an extension because I've several times over the last few years tried to turn down any overtures or suggestions that there should be a follow-up to Thick as a Brick, because I really didn't want it to be an extension. I didn't want to go back to that kind of nostalgic moment of 72 and do an album that was what happened next. I really wanted to take a 40-year step into the future and say what might have happened in that 40 years period, but from the perspective of today. So it's very much a jump ahead 40 years, and Gerald Bostock is, well, actually 50, because as I've reconstructed him, his parents lied about his age. At the time that he entered the poetry competition, he was actually 9, and by the time he won it, and this story unfolds, he was 10 years old, which makes him 50 today. I like round figures, so Gerald Bostock is 50. And the male model, the young lad who was on the album cover, was just picked out of one of these catalogues of models, essentially. Mm-hmm. You know, men, women, children, parents. It was one of those sort of theatrical casting, sort of modelling kind of magazine agency things. And I just picked this lad because I thought, well, he looks like a sort of young schoolboy that could be a bit precocious, and I just got an email from him yesterday, and he's 49 years old, and doesn't really remember anything about the shoot, mm-hmm. because to him it was just his parents dragged him along to this thing and he had to sit there and dress up in silly clothes and pose for a photograph. He didn't remember anything about it until he saw some years later on his elder brother's record collection a copy of Thick as a Brick, and they said, oh, that's you on the cover. So it's kind of a cute story, and sadly he'd not made my reacquaintance until now, and mm-hmm. I was actually trying to find this guy about 3 months ago when I had rather hoped to find the grown-up version of that young child model, and put him on the cover in his current mm-hmm. state, mm-hmm. and have him feature on the new album cover. But sadly, he only made contact now when it's too late and the album's already put to bed and the artwork's all done. But mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. There's that link between something that is 72 and something that's now. And it's a big jump. I mean, in 40 years, mm-hmm. a lot happens, and that's kind of what I'm trying to talk about on the new album.
And as you've created this new work, and it is linked to a work that dates back to 72, what do you think, Ian? You've perhaps taken a look at the world now compared to the world back then. What do you think has really struck you? What perhaps would Gerald Bostock make of the world now compared to the world back then?
Well, obviously there's a big difference in technology. There's a big difference in perhaps culture and social intercourse, in the sense that these days it's so much about social media, communication through Facebook and Twitter and websites and so on and so forth. And that's not a bad thing, because I tried to do this with the contemporary version of the St Cleeve Chronicle, the 16-page newspaper that was the packaging of the original album. Now it's an online community website serving the interests of St Cleeve, Linwell and Little Cruddock, 3 parishes within some notional area of southwest England. And I don't think it's a bad thing that we have all of this sort of stuff. People are not going to meet at the supermarket, they're not going to meet at the local church on a Sunday, but they are likely to communicate via social media. And so we have to accept that the world has changed, but it's not changed that much, because when I took as a model for the St Cleeve Chronicle back in 1972, the little parochial newspapers that would be in every small town, long since gone, most of them. These days they're replaced by the online newsletter, news sheet that's almost every little village seems to have one. And they're pretty amateurish, they're limited in their scope, but they are the reflection of today's version of what's happening in our community. And I cruise the internet a little bit to find suitable examples that I could draw from to create stcleeve.com, which is now online as the extension of the Tab 2 album and its context of today. And it's fun to do that. I think people enter into it as I have, in the sense that those who've participated, whether willingly or unwillingly, in featuring in the stcleeve.com online pages, they've kind of thought it was kind of fun. We go along with this, and some of them wanted to be themselves. Some of them might change their names, but there's many of them are real life people from different walks of life, in politics and media, whatever else, and people that I know, and people in the world of music too. I think they've all rather enjoyed being not parodied, but used in a respectful way, but used as fictitious characters in stcleeve.com. And we still have a little way to run with that yet, because I'm going to get the fans to write in and pretend to be local correspondents to the parish newspapers by writing their own spoof news stories. So we'll get some of the we'll post a few of those each week. And
as somebody who's always been known as an innovator in terms of your own creativity and what you do, the fact that technology now allows fans to do that, to really interact with your projects in that way, how do you feel about that? Do you welcome that? Is that a good thing?
Yeah, well, I'm neither computer Luddite nor am I technophobe. I'm somewhere in between. It's part of my life. It's the tools of my trade. I mean, luckily, I probably because of my children as much as anything else, being born into that age when computers were becoming a reality, made that transition, as my wife did too, to computer technology. Really back in the very early 80s, and it was, first of all, it was electronic typewriters, then it was electronic typewriters with a very short little bit of memory that you could actually see something on a screen that you typed out, then it became a bona fide word processor on a screen, and it became, through the good efforts of Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, it became fully blown publishing and word processing programs like Microsoft Word. And luckily we were there at the forefront of that, so we moved with it. Some people at my age have had a tougher catch-up time in the sense that to begin with they thought, I don't like this stuff, and it's a bit of a mountain to climb if you're in your 40s or 50s trying to catch up. It's maybe a little easier now than it was 10 years ago, in as much as things are a bit more intuitive, things are a bit better understood. So I encourage grannies everywhere to get online and meet up with their lost school friends and indeed their own families on Facebook and on Skype. It's a blessing to bring people together. So it's never too late to start, even if you're not involved in that sort of stuff. But I know a good few people who just say, I don't even have a computer, I've never sent an email. including at least one football manager. And do we really believe him? No, I'm not sure. So yeah, people are slow to learn. Some people are faster to learn, and some of it have it foisted upon them because it becomes the tool or tools of their trade. And in my case, getting used to the idea of digital technology, computers in music, I grasped that particular nettle back in 1981-82 when music technology was developing at that pace. And so I've gone along with it, but do I like it? Well, it's okay when it's useful to me, when it serves my purpose. And I think therein lies the key. You know, that computer technology is there to serve us. But the minute we start getting sucked into falling prey to seductive programs that seem to, you know, we become the servants and the computer software becomes the master, then there's a big danger, particularly in music, because so many people just think, oh wow, I can make music, and it's all there. It's in drum loops and samples of this and that and whatever, and you can make a professional sounding record in your bedroom with your laptop computer. The trouble is going to sound pretty much like the other guy's homemade song on their bedroom laptop computer. So there's a sameness and a convenience about using technology and programs that just make it too easy. So, you know, I think you should use all that technology, but make sure that you stay in charge of it and don't let it start to rule the way you create music. You know, you've got to be the boss. You use it where it can be useful for you, but don't let it take over your creative instincts, which ultimately have to be, you know, more about here and not so much about this.
And there's a tour which is coming to Birmingham on the 30th of April, the Symphony Hall in Birmingham, I believe, for Thick of a Brick.
If you say so.
That's my understanding. It, and it's billed as, it's going to be something that's quite theatrical, as your shows have a habit of being.
Well, they have been in times gone by, and they are. They are on this occasion only because I think we are making reference to the original Thick as a Brick performance, which had these really amateurish theatrical moments, but they were fun, but they weren't slick and clever, and there was nothing in the way of technology back then. So these days, of course, yes, we're using a lot of software and audio-visual technology to present something that's a bit more in keeping with the modern age. But the trick, if it's a trick or a failing, I'm not sure, is to keep it still a little bit amateurish, to make it look a little bit kind of friendly, a little bit not too perfect. So I'm not going out there to do some huge production spectacular that looks like a Madonna on tour, or Michael Jackson, God help him if he'd survived to do his ill-fated tours that almost certainly would have been. That's not the route that I want to take. I want this to look a little bit more parochial, you know, a little bit more St. Cleeve, and it doesn't want to be too glossy and too clever. Unfortunately, to be able to do it, you've got to be both glossy and clever, because you really got to know this stuff. You've got to know the technology and how to get to that level that may look a little off the cuff, a little less than perfect. You've actually got to be pretty perfect in the first place to be able to manipulate the media to get that end outcome. You've got to understand it and know it. And I know a bit of it to some extent, but I do rely on others around me to be part of the team of putting that together. So I will have another co-conspirator on stage in terms of being a performer who's an actor, singer, mime, dance kind of person, who will be an extra character, personality on stage. And I have it all. What's now being referred to by the musicians as the Bible is the whole show script of every little event, you know, video events and musical and the lyrics and everything that's going to be in there, which is growing by the day as the detail gets put in. And into that Bible are carefully written lots of little places where fly by the seat of your pants. It's an improv moment, because otherwise it would just become so repetitious. You know, the script was the same every day. It's actually got to allow for these moments of improvisation and variability, and that to me is really important as a musician. There's some places where, not just for me, but all the musicians can have a little flight of fantasy for a few bars where they just take off somewhere and it's the way it feels right tonight. and that's an important ingredient for me anyway in my music. I like arrangement, I like structure, I like something that you can fall back on. You know, the skeleton of the, got to have a good foundation, good strong bones, but you've got to flesh it out with some moments of fantasy, variability, and on occasion falling flat on your face when you get it horribly wrong.
I guess in a way those are the things that make each performance unique to the performer and the crowd as well, and they go away, the audience go away having being able to say, we saw something that nobody else will ever have seen with these artists.
And I think that's very important for an audience to feel that, and they can feel that when they go to see One Man, Two Governors in the theatre stage, if it's still running. I'm not sure that it's not finished by now, but it's a good example of something that is actually quite carefully scripted, quite carefully presented as a piece of good theatre, but you go away with a strong feeling that the time that you saw it was unique, because the very blurred become the lines between the rehearsed, the calculated, the scripted, and the little moments of improv that creep into it that then may be repeated the next night or may not. And it apparently, as a production, it has evolved over that period of time, you know, it's been on to give it that sense of I think walking that potentially dangerous line between being beautifully written and scripted and being winged a little bit each night by the performers, who will try something a little different, and if it sticks, it works, you keep it in. If it doesn't work, don't do it again tomorrow. So yes, for the audience, I think they get that feeling that it's every night is special, and as a performer, that's what you want to try to bring to an audience anytime, anywhere. There's no good just being up your own arse and thinking, well, I'm just doing this for me. Well, the reality is we are just doing it for us, but we want to share it with you. We want you to feel that we're all in this together.
And I guess in a way, perhaps by allowing that little bit of space, it also allows you to perhaps create a little bit of that sort of tongue-in-cheek humour that you spoke about earlier. That sort of opportunity comes in there if the mood is right at that moment.
Yeah, and some of it's got to be a little edgy. It's got to be a little dangerous. You've got to push some boundaries. And I know in one particular area of this projected show, boundaries are being pushed probably beyond the limits, and I have to really, I've got to bounce it off some other people and see that, you know, before I say, well, I think this is going to work. It could just be a step too far. It could offend somebody in the audience, and I'm not there to, you know, I don't want to be like, you know, we've seen it happen with Monty Python, and towards the end of the Monty Python series back in the 70s, that they were so desperately trying to outdo themselves, and it just got to the point where it was not really very funny anymore. It was starting to get rather cruel and dark, and you know, it just wasn't working. The same thing happened with Little Britain, you know, that it was dangerous and very edgy, but then started to get to the point where you really did become offended. You know, you were actually thinking, this is not just funny, this is just trying to push the bounds. And you know, it's happened with lots of comedians that they perhaps don't have people around them to say, hang on, this is actually not funny anymore, this is going to upset somebody. In fact, it's upsetting me, so don't do it. You know, no one's prepared to tell them that, and they only find the limits by overstepping them. And it's the same with music, and particularly in the prog rock era. You only found where the limits were by going beyond it and getting beaten up in the press, or by the audience deserting you and not buying you a new record. So I think we all have to kind of probably go a little bit too far in order to find where the boundaries lie, but most of us should try to rely on the people around us to say, I don't think so.
Well, certainly in Anderson, in your case, you've been very successful, and it's been a pleasure to talk to you, both as the interviewer and also as a fan. So thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. That's Ian Anderson on the bass session.